praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Friends, I'd like to tell you this morning about an old Broadway musical and movie. It was called The Music Man. The story takes place in a small town in the Midwest called River City, and the time frame is probably somewhere around the year 1900. The music man calls himself Professor Harold Hill. Hill is a salesman who comes into a town and convinces the people that they have a problem. And then he uses the perceived problem to sell his goods. So Hill goes to River City and tells the people they have a big problem right there in River City. Their children are on the verge of moral corruption because a pool hall has opened. Pool halls were notorious in those days as places of corruption where kids picked up all kinds of bad habits. And so he convinces the people of River City that the children are learning bad things. However, he, Professor Harold Hill, just happens to have a great solution to the problem. The children needed something constructive to do, and he had just the thing. He suggested that the healthy activity for the kids would be to form a band. In fact, it just so happened that he could supply the uniforms, the music, and the instruments. He even offered to teach music to the children. He would make that offer in town after town, but usually after he was paid for the equipment, the uniforms, and so forth, he took off. He got on a train and no one ever saw him again. Well, when he got to River City and convinced the people that they needed a band, something unforeseen happened. He fell in love. He fell in love with the town librarian, known as Marion the librarian. So he found himself saddled with having to teach the kids music because he didn't want to leave River City and his beloved. However, he didn't know anything about music, and he taught the children in a very poor fashion. And in the final scene of the musical, the children give their first performance for their parents, and they were terrible. It was a complete disaster. But the parents thought it was just wonderful. To their parents, they were a fantastic marching band playing 76 trombones in the big parade. You would wonder why parents would think that bad music was just wonderful. And I think it's because they know that their children are not good musicians, but they also know that the kids are on the right track to become proficient. They understand that Rome was not built in a day and that it takes time and patience to attain any worthwhile goal in life. Those parents in that musical, The Music Man, are for me images of God. God looks at you and me just the way you and me are right now, and he says, "Isn't that just wonderful?" Why would God think that? God knows that we are not all that we should be, but he also sees that we're on the right track. We're in the process of becoming. If you were not on the right track, I doubt that you would be tuned in to this Mass this morning. God knows that Rome was not built in a day, and that it takes time for us to become what God is calling us to be. And he's patient. Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope. Those words, of course, come from the first letter of Peter, our second reading for today. Peter, of course, was a buffoon who tried to walk on water and nearly drowned because he lost faith. Peter was a braggart who denied the Lord 3 times. He was a coward who was nowhere to be seen on that first Good Friday. But Peter wanted it to be better. He wanted to serve Christ loyally and faithfully and become everything that God was calling him to become. And eventually, he reached his goal. With the help of God's grace, he got where he wanted to be. Be ready, he says in this letter of his, to tell people why you have hope. We have hope because our God is a loving Father. He loves us more than we can possibly imagine. He knows that we are not where we should be in our pilgrimage of faith, but he's overjoyed that we are on the road, in the game, in the process. Teresa of Avila lived in the 16th century, and she was instrumental in reforming the Carmelite sisters throughout Spain. And she devised a number of ways to help young women who were becoming religious sisters, help them become proficient in praying. She had a number of these techniques. She would tell the would-be nuns, set up 2 chairs in your cell, that is to say in your room. You sit in one and imagine God sitting in the other one. And think about what does God see when he looks at you? Reflect on that. And then the girls went off and tried it. And then they would come together again so they could talk about their experience. And usually they would say, oh, it was a sad, depressing experience. In their imagination, God saw their shortcomings, their deficiencies, their sins. Oh, no, Teresa would tell them, that's the wrong God. Our God is our Father. What does your earthly father see when he looks at you? What does a mother see when she looks upon her son? Parents are thrilled with their children. They do not concentrate on the negative aspects of their children's character. They see the goodness, and while they acknowledge the fact that their children are not yet what God is calling them to be, they are grateful that they are going in the right direction. They are on the road. They are still in the game. And that's how the Father sees you and me, and that is the reason for our hope. Amen. I invite you to join